Hi everybody, it's Patricia Warby from Alchemy Therapies, and I'm going to record this again. I started to record it and made a mistake early on, so this is the second go. I wanted today to do a book review on a little book. It's quite tiny. It's like a pocket book called Understanding Living Systems by Raymond Noble and Denis Noble. They're brothers. I've been watching a lot of Denis Noble's videos on YouTube recently, along with a lot of others, because I'm already planning my next book after this one, The Mind Medicine, that I'm currently finishing. But I wanted to do a review of this. Now, this is a book from a whole series by Cambridge University Press, which are meant to be kind of introductions to subjects in the area of biology. So there's understanding evolution, intelligence, fertility, species, all sorts of things, reproduction, and the nature-nurture debate. That sounds like an interesting one. Now, this one was relevant to me because of the viewing I've been doing of his ideas and how he contradicts the dogma, what they call the central dogma that I was taught when I was at university, which I didn't know it was called the central dogma. I had no understanding of that. It was just the truth that DNA is the code of life and that it translates into everything we see and creates life from nothing, as it were, or from the blueprint. And of course, that's spawned a lot of ideas around the importance of DNA, and it's created a whole view of disease, that diseases are largely genetic. And indeed, that was what the Human Genome Project of the early 2000s aimed to look at, because the belief was if we could map the genome, all the DNA and the chromosomes, all the codes, we could crack the code and eliminate all disease. So it was a really noble idea, sorry for the pun, but it was a noble idea designed to, produce some understanding and correction in nature's errors. Because that's the idea of the selfish gene, is that DNA is the sole contributor really to the human or any living organism's experience, and that it's a one-way street from DNA to RNA, which is the messenger molecule, to proteins, and proteins make up the structure largely and the function, certainly the function of everything we are. But that's been called into question, and indeed, Denis always seems to have a dig at this idea of the central dogma, particularly the idea of the selfish gene, things being selfish. Richard Dawkins wrote a very famous book about 40 years ago now called The Selfish Gene, where he just said genes were basically ruling everything, and that the reason the organism exists is to further the genetic kind of reproductive capacity and therefore evolve the species. And Denis profoundly disagrees and says it's not a bottom up, it's not a from the smallest to the largest directionality. It's actually influenced in a series of nested cavities, if you like, from nature, the universe, the society we live in, the culture, the family, the organism, the cells, the molecules and the atoms. And so a series of nested interreactivity sort of circles where each level communicates with the one above and below, which actually maps to a large extent that which I found through looking at the mathematics of nature, and how iterative, in other words, things that sort of repeat and try again, cycles are part of nature. And indeed, when looking at the universal constants that operate to create these sort of these cycles, these resonances in living systems. So it chimes with me much, much more than you have a genetic predisposition and bang, you're going to get that disease, which is largely how things still operate. If you get your DNA read now, you'll get a very detailed report after you've had your DNA result, and it will say you have a high risk for this and a medium risk for that and a low risk for the other, and it's quite terrifying if you don't know that that dogma is actually largely incorrect. So to the book, it's worth saying that what Denis is proposing here is that the system organizes itself because it has communication that's two-way, that has a feedback loop. It's not even two-way, it's multiple inputs from the environment. Now, we've known quite recently, we've discovered the idea of epigenetics, which has kind of thrown into question to a large extent this idea that DNA is just the blueprint and the output is fixed, but that there are feedback loops in the system which turn the genes on and off. So we've known that. But Denis goes a lot further because he's looking at the kind of biological systems within which this operates. And indeed, the title, Understanding Living Systems, makes sense, doesn't it? So I thought I'd go through some of what I learned from this book. I think it's a really, really important book. You wouldn't believe that from the size. I mean, it's about 148 pages, and then there's a few extra pages at the end with a lovely index and some extra reading, and it's been really well done. But the concepts in here are just so important for changing the way you view life and your part in the whole ecosystem that you are embedded in. And that you might wonder, why am I talking about this when largely what I do is I work with people to help them heal psychologically, mostly, although I do look at some of the body systems naturopathically. Well, because I'm interested in the mind-body connection, I'm interested in consciousness, I'm interested in life, actually. And to me, the whole healing process is iterative. It does have this repeating bouncing around. It's not random. It's trying out new forms or new beliefs. People get very stuck in illness because, well, or dis-ease, because they have beliefs that are stuck, that are driving some of the cellular responses. And you may think that's an outrageous notion. It was to me when I first discovered it. But I've been working now in this field for 12, 13 years, and been getting really great results with helping people heal when they change the central operating system, if you like. You've got the hardware and the software, and it's the software that we really need to shift, and that's largely to do with thought patterns, belief structures, things that limit you, value systems that have got compromised, and so on. So I'm just going to go through some of the points and explain a little how I think they're relevant to what I do. So, all right, I've already said that DNA to proteins is not a one-way road. Okay, there is a feedback loop, and the environment gets to change the DNA too. And these largely, as I said, by gene regulation. So the things that turn the genes on and off. There are things called transcription factors. So, transcription or transcribing is the process of DNA being read to RNA. So it turns it on and off. It also regulates the way the DNA is wound, because DNA isn't like the double helix that you see in general diagrams. It's twisted on itself into the chromosomes, and it's wrapped in what's called a histone sort of sleeve, if you like, and you have to unwrap DNA in order to read it. And so the things that wrap around it, those histones, are also regulated to unravel, to allow access to the DNA within. So there's all different ways that the cell can allow the environment to actually check or adjust the readout. Okay, and not only that, but the environment, the cell can reorganize the DNA. Okay, what he calls jumping genes. Now that is absolutely against the central dogma, all right, which said that nothing changes the DNA. It's inherited from your mum and dad, and basically it's the luck of the draw, all right? But that's not true. And so we have a lot more power than we think we do to change our expression of ourselves, to change how we function. And that's psychological, but it's also physiological, how well we are. how well our systems function. And this was actually discovered to be the basis of evolutionary change and how we adapt and grow and become human beings who walk on two legs, for instance. How did that happen? Well, it was a reorganization of the DNA to allow that. And it comes about through sometimes viruses. The evolution of a placenta, for instance, was introduced into mammals via viral DNA. And so it's not just our own DNA that gets reorganized, we take in DNA from other species too over time. And so this adaptive evolutionary change was discovered, believe it or not, in the 1930s to the 50s by a researcher called Barbara McClintock. Now, you've never heard of her, have you? I hadn't. This is often the case with people who, women generally, who are in science. You hear of their supervisors who usually claim the Nobel Prize. The same was Watson and Crick, who discovered DNA itself. There was a woman involved in that. I'm trying to think of her name. Was it Rosamond someone? Anyway, she actually did the crystallography that helped identify the structure of DNA, but she was never credited. Barbara McClintock seems to have suffered a similar fate, where she was doing work with corn, and she was looking at the adaptation that corn had made over time as a response to stress. And she found that there were new segments in the DNA in different places. And of course, she tried to publish her work, and it was received as completely nonsense. They couldn't believe that that would be possible. And it wasn't until many years later, with the ability to read the DNA that we discovered now, that her work was vindicated. So understanding that DNA is not fixed is one really important thing, and that it can feed back on itself and change and adapt. And that is the basis of evolution. Now, in order to do that, it needs constraints from higher up the chain, if you like. And in this sense, the chain means the nested series of living structures that respond to information. So if we start at the smallest, that would be atoms. I mean, there are smaller things than atoms, but let's start there. They organize themselves into molecules. Molecules organize themselves into cells in living systems, cells into tissues, tissues into organs, and organs become the organism, which of course is nested within, let's say, your environment. And that could be your family structure, your social structure, nature itself, and the cosmos. Okay, so there's a series of nested structures which each feed back in the system. And this is what is meant by a complex living system. Okay, it doesn't mean it's complicated. It means it's self-organizing. It has structures within it which are informational and are able to relay back and change things to adapt better. So that's the meaning of a complex system, and living systems are complex, all right? They kind of go, instead of into entropy, which is what we've always thought, the idea that things get more disordered, it's actually chaos forming order. And that's chaos theory. Don't go into that. But you can have both things going on at the same time. You can have systems that feel quite random, but somehow little tweaks in that system form organized systems that have this feedback loop. Now, the important thing about that is you need a constraint, okay? Like when we study in physics, we study systems, and we say they're open or closed, and energy exchange happens in systems, but the living organism is a closed system. It has a constraint in it, and for most cells, that is the cell membrane. And we've long known that membranes are far more than a bag around the cell or the organizing structures inside. They actually are the brains of the cell. That was the basis of a book called The Biology of Belief, which I did review a while ago. A very important book from, I think, 2009. So The cell membrane is a sort of, it's a bilayer. It has a structure with lipids and also a watery layer as well. And it has pores inside that push through the cell membrane and allow transport of molecules from the outside to the inside. So cell membranes are very, very key in this process of interaction. And I think it's worth saying that Denis started his researches in heart cells back in the 1960s when he was just a graduate student, and he found the cellular basis for the heart rhythm, all right, which is an extraordinary understanding. He said that it isn't the chemistry so much as the voltage, it's the electrochemistry of the heart cell, which allows that familiar pattern that you'll all associate with a heart rhythm. And he was able to map it. He actually showed when certain channels open up and charged molecules called ions move through, like potassium and calcium. He could map the peak and the trough to those ion channels opening or closing. And so that was an extraordinary discovery for a graduate student. So it kind of led him to look further and deeper into all these living systems. So his idea here is that genes are not the mere mechanistic determinants of form. They're not just a readout like a computer program. They are tools that the organism uses. So the cells use the organs, then read the cells, and so on. It's a very important tool. It's not one to be dismissed. And indeed, you know, your genes do matter, of course, and they need to be read and transcribed and translated, but you can't understand them in isolation from the organism that contains them. And he says they dance to the tune of life, which I think is a wonderful phrase. I love metaphor, because for me, that's right brain. It's not fixity, it's curiosity. It's the idea that dancing to the tune of life. So if you say that the DNA is the notes, it's like saying, if I just play the notes in any order, that's music. Well, no, it's not. They have to be played in a certain order. So if you think of it's the orchestration, if you like. So far from being a mechanistic machine, the body is an orchestra that plays or conducts the music, which is the DNA, the proteins, and so on. And the other thing he points out is that organisms have agency. They have purpose. They seek to interact with other beings. They have to anticipate the interaction and what it means, forming meaning. And therefore, they have to iterate or feed back what works in any given situation and change things. Now, that chimes with me as well, because when I'm working with people and I'm attempting to change their belief systems or the memories that underpin the belief systems that are hindering their health and making them feel stuck and ill, we can't just say, well, change your mind. You know, we have to find the system and interact with it. And usually that's through interacting with unconscious memory. And how we do that is we use sensory stimulation in a particular way. I've described that in other videos, so I'm not going to go into that today. But it is this shift that we make that illustrates to me that there is a sort of chain reaction. If I change somebody's implicit memory, something that's unconsciously driving them, and I change the memory, I can't change what happened to them, but I can make the thing that is driving that over in the past, then the body has new information. The cells have new information that they're not under stress. And you'll remember stress is one of the big drivers for change, adaptation. And so if we take away the stress and replace it with a sense of agency, that I can change my belief. I have the ability to form a new belief. Everything shifts. And I've watched this happen, and you can kind of see it unraveling in people's body posture, in their facial expression, as they realize they're okay, they survived. And it's not this survival and fight and flight system that they've been operating in for so many years. So agency is another factor that Denis talks about here. And it's so missing from most discussions of healing. We think it's just about fixing the problem, and that's what medicine relies on. And yet there is an intelligence and an informational exchange going on here, which is why you can't heal anything through just fixing one chemical reaction, or just looking at the body system without the mind. Everything talks to everything else. Another thing he said, he gets in a dig, by the way, on the selfish gene. Again, he likes to dig away at that one. But genes can't be selfish. Even if it's considered a metaphor, it's not a valid one, because genes themselves don't have agency, all right, only organisms do. And so you can see again this idea that it's coming from the bigger system down to the smaller system, that the information that's driving things is nested. He also says evolution is reliant on cooperation, not competition. Now, we've always thought since Darwin that, you know, it's a random process, that evolution is a random process. And he says there is randomness in it. There is a stochastic interaction. Stochastic is a posh word for random. But it drives a sense of order. It drives organization. And so it's actually cooperation that drives change. It's the ability for organisms to interact with each other that largely changes things for the better. And so I think that's so important, because we're in a society at the moment that looks at everything being mechanistic. We're so focused on AI as it's going to solve all our problems and take over the world and possibly take over us. Well, I don't think so. I personally don't think so, because people have misunderstood living systems. We can't recreate a living system entirely. We can't recreate emotions, for instance, in an AI system. But just understanding that it's a cooperative system, and that we're not mechanistic beings. We actually have degrees of adaptation and interaction that go way, way beyond an algorithm. A plus B equals C. You know, it's multifactorial. These systems are incredibly complex. So genes don't randomly mutate, which I'm so pleased to hear, because when I studied biochemistry and physiology, we were told that's exactly what happened, and therefore cancer was a random event driven by your genes, and therefore a bad luck thing. No, it appears not. It's a response to stress in the organism, which, you know, I totally concur. I've seen so many people, including myself, who have suffered illness. Sometimes it's cancer, other times it's different diseases, as a response to stress, usually a few months or even years afterwards. But there's been a definite link. And so it makes sense to me. And I deal a lot with people who are having energy deficits. So things like chronic fatigue, long COVID, fibromyalgia. And these are largely thought to be mitochondrial deficits, because mitochondria are your energy factories. But you know what? Mitochondria are far more than that. They are sensing organisms in themselves. They are derived from bacteria who were engulfed way back in evolution by an early, sort of the precursor to an animal cell called an archaea. And so mitochondria were bacteria. They've been recruited by our cells to produce energy, because bacteria are extremely good at producing energy. They have lots of very convoluted membranes inside, which have a very important energy transfer function. So even the evolution of mitochondria in our cells is driven largely by cooperation. And so I thought this whole understanding had real relevance for people who are going through a situation in their lives where they feel stressed, they feel overwhelmed, they've had something in their life that has given their cells the information that they're in danger, and that shuts down the mitochondria until you are able to shift the information away from that to safety. And so that's really this feedback loop that Denis is talking about. Now, I'm just going to finish off by reading a few quotes out here, because I did think it's important to get the Denis and Raymond's words here. This is Barbara McClintock in the 1930s, okay, someone who you've never even heard of. In the future, attention undoubtedly will be centered on the genome, and with greater appreciation of the significance of its significance as a highly sensitive organ of the cell, monitoring genomic activities and connecting common errors, sensing the unusual and unexpected events and responding to them, often by restructuring the genome. That is so in advance of our understanding at the time. I'm amazed she wasn't recognized and didn't win a Nobel Prize for that. So here's another quote, right? We create unfamiliar problems at the psychosocial level, right? So we face a problem in our lives, and these feed back to our tissues and cells. Acting socially enhances our ability to find solutions, but it requires cooperation and sharing. It is only in this context that concepts of selfishness and altruism can have any meaning. All right, so working at the organism level, not at the gene level. And when I'm working with people, what I'm trying to do is socially connect with them. Our nervous systems aim to connect so that I can shift people from feeling alone and vulnerable and helpless into a cooperative frame where we get curious about what it is that's really going on. And so it's engaging with the problem without avoiding it that allows you to shift into a new operative condition where you change your beliefs. Okay, so we're using some form of machine modeling here, but it's working at a complexity level that no machine can yet do. Another quote, which I loved, was, the ability to adapt to circumstances is an example of evolved functionality, so evolution in action. Therefore, dogmatic models of life, seeking to reduce behavior to little more than a set of algorithms, misunderstand the intelligence of organisms. And so any healing modality that just seeks to address one aspect is going to be very, very limited, in my view. And what is cellular intelligence? Well, the only intelligence in such a system would be seeking reward and avoiding harm. Okay, so in a small cell, that's the basis of intelligence. But intelligence in the organism is more than that. Living organisms balance competing imperatives in making decisions. And therefore, that balance is not best represented as an algorithm, since we also have to account for creativity in living systems. Right? There is creativity in the system, which we need to recognize. And here's another. Another's intention, another person, is a part of our changing environment. Of course, we're psychosocial beings. And part of the situational logic is what we're responding to. We do not merely receive information passively, we anticipate it and make decisions based on that anticipation. Now, that is such an important point, and it actually links in with another book, which I'm going to review very shortly, that looks at how emotions are created on the fly, as it were, as an anticipation or perception of what's going on. This is individual to you, right? So we make decisions based on what we think is going on, not on reality. If you believe there is such a thing as reality, many quantum physicists disagree. And this is my final quote. An open system adaptability, all right, one that has an interactivity, led to the development of language. And language, I'm using that now to convey these ideas to you, and abstract thought. The idea that if I said to you, red tomato, and you can think of a red tomato, that's an abstract thought. If you have that ability, and actually your brain does not know the difference between the thought of a red tomato and actually perceiving it. And you know, that's a human characteristic that gives us the ability to shift and change. And so this is a profoundly optimistic book. It's very much geared towards people who want to understand biology. He claims to have written it for the lay reader. I would say yes, an interested lay reader would certainly get this. He's not gone into too much complexity here. And I love the playfulness, some of the titles, what love has to do with it. I think that's borrowing from a song title. You know, he has brought together a huge amount of information in a very, very small and readable book. And I would highly recommend, if you're interested in biology, if you're interested in life, the universe and everything. And, you know, I also found it really instructive for the work that I do. It's also, as I've said, given me an idea for a book which I think I'm going to write on the new biological understandings that we're getting now and how they relate to healing, because for me, that is the most profound understanding. Well, I'm going to leave it there. If you found any of this interesting, please comment below. And I also encourage you to get in touch if you would like to explore any of what I offer. You can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk, and also my books, The Scar That Won't Heal, The World Within, and there's a few others you'll find, including things on mathematics as well, which is The Mystery of Number. All right, take care. See you soon. Bye.